Good morning. So my name is Alessandro Righi. I'm an investigative journalist. I'm an independent journalist. What does that mean? It means that I don't work for a broadcaster or any particular media company. Um, what I do is I find news and then I propose them to a broadcaster. And if they want me to work on those news, then they will hire me to do so. With a production contract. I have a production company. I used to have another production company before. It was called Invisible Dog. Now I have a different production company. It's called Outcast. Uh, Mostly what I do is I work on mafia stories, Cosa Nostra, 'Ndrangheta, Camorra, money laundering, um, corruption, all of that stuff. Um, it's investigative journalism, but all journalism is pretty much investigative. And I know you guys are probably oriented towards the diplomatic careers, or that's what I gather from the name of the festival. uh, but you might want to take into consideration uh, working as a journalist, and being an investigative journalist is going to be very, very useful in the future, seeing how things are going right now. Because, a journalist is the watchdog of democracy, uh, and organized crime is the watchdog of power. So seeing how power has gotten exponentially more powerful, there's going to be a need for a lot of people, going and probing and finding out and, asking around to figure out what's going on, how our lives are affected by power. And that's the role of investigative journalists. So I'm going to take a minute to tell you who I am. Uh, like you see my name there. I grew up in Congo, in Kinshasa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, uh, where I went to an American school there. Then I moved back to Italy in 1991 uh, because there was a big conflict in Congo. The dictator, who was called Mobutu Sese Seko, was chased from the country because at that time the Berlin Wall had fallen, communism. Uh, Mobutu, the dictator of Congo, had the role of he was supposed to stop communism coming from Angola, which is in the south of Congo. Uh, Once the Cold War ended, there was no need for that anymore. The dictator was chased out and he was replaced by another dictator. Right now, there is a democratically elected government there, which is having a lot of trouble because there's a big war in the eastern part of Congo, in Ituri. A lot of the mineral resources of the world are there. Uh, Not only rare earths, which is what we hear a lot of talk about, but lithium, cobalt, coltan. There's everything there, and there's a war there, and those minerals are being taken out. Uh, and as you know, we have wars everywhere nowadays. There's a war in Ukraine. There's a war in Yemen. There's the whole Gaza thing. Uh, all of these conflicts are functional for business. Uh, Otherwise they probably wouldn't happen. So that's another aspect of journalism, which is very important, is trying to tell the people who are doing something else, who don't have the time to go out there and find out what's going on in these countries and why, uh, their cell phone has such and such minerals in it that come from a country that's plagued by war, where children are being used as manual laborers in mines. A lot of people don't know that, but that's also the role of journalists, not only investigative journalists, But it's a very, very important part of democracy. That's why, it's like the fourth power, they say. Uh, so basically, I'm going to explain how it works. Being an independent journalist means you have to sit a long time in front of your computer, follow the news, figure out what's going on, what's closer to you, what you can find out, and have an edge over other people who are telling the news, calling people, finding out more details than others. And then once you have a story, what you do is you figure out what slots, what programs could broadcast your story. I've worked for many years for Al Jazeera English for a program called People in Power. Uh, I would write to the head of the program and send him some like 3 or 4 proposals. Say, there's a story about migrants being exploited by the mafia in Puglia. And these people come from all over Africa. So it has like, an international angle, although it's a story based in Italy because I'm a journalist based in Italy. And so if they like that story, they will tell you, yeah, why don't you send me a treatment? So what you do is you start calling people, and you develop the story. You write a longer, a more detailed proposal, and you send it to them. Now, if you manage to convince them, they will say, okay, let's make a contract. And, you'll send them a budget, how much this is going to cost, and they will approve the budget. They will sign the contract. And after that, you go out and shoot. So how does that work? First of all, you have to have an idea of what you want to tell. And then you have to go out there and, usually with a cameraman. And it's a little bit particular because a lot of people that you'll be interviewing as an investigative reporter don't want to be interviewed. And, they don't want to be asked the questions that you're going to ask them. So you have to be, very convincing. And you also have to be a little bit, how shall I say? Sometimes you will have to film them with hidden cameras, or you'll have your cameraman who will just be holding the camera like this, but he's actually recording. People will get, very upset. They'll get violent. They'll threaten you. And that's something that you'll have to take into account if you want to do this kind of job. But that's the way it's done. Right now, I have a lot of colleagues working for, newspapers, daily newspapers. I've worked for a daily newspaper for a long time. And nowadays, most of these people are telling me that the offices, the people working for newspapers are getting cut. Resources are getting cut. People are forced to write maybe an entire page of news by themselves. So what my colleagues tell me is I don't have the time anymore to go out there and go ring a doorbell and find somebody who actually was on the scene of something that happened and actually saw what went on. So what they do is they mostly use like ANSA, AGI, all of these like, press agencies, AP, Reuters, and then they write a piece. So what's not being done nowadays is to go out there and maybe get, some court documents for a certain story, find the names, find the addresses, find the numbers, go out there, ring the doorbell, try to put your nose into, the businesses that people don't want told. That's what's not being done, except for, very few exceptions. Here in Italy, we have, as you might know, one of the very few programs that actually do investigative reporting is Report. And Sigfrido Ranucci was, threatened with a bomb that blew up his cars underneath his house. So it's something that's not being done. There's very few people doing it, and these people are not being protected. So, and they're being threatened. They're being threatened legally because every time I do a story for Al Jazeera or Rai or whatever, there will be a lawyer, going through the script and asking me, oh, you're saying this. Do you have the papers to back that up? Because otherwise we're going to get sued. And this is happening more and more often. I mean, back in the days, they used to tell me that the UK was like the capital in the world of lawsuits for journalists. But nowadays, Italy is pretty much in the same position because every time you say something, you might get sued. And, you know, you probably won't lose the lawsuit, but it's something that, it just hangs over your head. And then there's a second lawsuit and a third lawsuit, and it makes it very, very hard to work because every time, you'll always have a back thought and say, well, maybe it's not so convenient for me to say this, even though, there's a public interest in knowing such information, you know. So that's why there's very few people doing this. But I hope that a lot of you will choose to, if you're not investigative journalists, you'll choose to be truthful and try to find out actually what's going on behind the scenes and tell others, because by sharing information, and that's how we defeat all of this. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Uh, do you have any questions?
Thanks for that. I just wondered, so if you are investigating the mafia and organized crime, how do you I mean, is it a threat against you personally, or are there members of family, friends, etc., who you're also considering when you go after these people?
Well, uh, the mafia is not like it used to be here, at least here in Italy, in the 80s and 90s. If you talked about the mafia back then, you'd probably get, threatened, shot, you're blown up or whatever. Nowadays, the mafia has, how should I say, leveled up. So they don't need to do that anymore. They have money, they invest in the markets, they do money laundering with very complex corporative scams, through taxes, VAT. They have professionals working for them. They themselves are professionals because their children, with the money that they made from the drug trade, from the kidnappings and such, they sent their children to university. But in Cosa Nostra, in Drangheta, Camorra, it's a family thing. So it's very, very hard for the children of people who are in the mafia to not be in the mafia or to not have that kind of mentality. So nowadays they know that if they kill a journalist or if they kill a prosecutor, you know, uh, the state will react in a very violent way. So they don't want to do that anymore. So you might get threatened, or they might tell you things, but in a very subtle kind of way, or you'll get sued. So I've never been in a position where, I felt that my life was threatened. I've been threatened with other things. So it's not so much that you'll feel, you'll be afraid of somebody coming under your door and just shooting you. Um, but yeah, if people stop doing this job and there's only one, two people left, then it will start happening again. Like it happened with Caruana Galizia in Malta, and a lot of other colleagues in other countries. I'm talking about the situation in Italy. Of course, if you go and do this job in countries where there is less of a, you know, less rights or less of a control by authorities, by police, by the magistrates, then it's a lot more dangerous.
You mentioned how you used to work for daily news. And I wanted to ask, like, if you can tell a bit more about that and why you chose not to anymore and you work as a freelance now. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I've had a very strange history because I was working for a Japanese newspaper, but for their correspondence bureau here in Rome. Japanese newspaper is the Yomiuri Shimbun Tokyo, which is this huge newspaper, sells like 12 million copies daily. And they had an English version, which was called the Daily Yomiuri. I don't know if it still exists, actually. I worked for them for a long time, but I wasn't really working on the things that I was really interested in, because we had to cover a number of things from Italy. Usually, foreign newspapers are interested in two things from Italy, or three. The Vatican, number one, food, and politics. But, when I was working for the newspaper, internationally, people were very interested in Italian politics because Berlusconi was there. And he had this way of doing things, which was totally, random. So it was very interesting for everybody. And now everybody's doing this, and like even Donald Trump. I mean, it's a way of doing politics nowadays. But yeah, so I was working on things that weren't really that interesting for me. So when I got the chance, and I had a colleague, well, actually it was a school friend, who said, "Why don't we set up a production company and start, doing documentaries?" That was the idea to begin with. I said, "Okay, let's do it," and we started working. We did documentaries for Rai. I remember, I don't know if you guys know, there was a show called Voyager, and they did very strange, like Bigfoot and that kind of thing. And these guys would send us around the world finding all of these strange stories, like the meteor crash in Tunguska in Siberia and stuff like that. And then little by little, we figured out that we'd like to be more serious in our reporting. And so we said, what could we report on in Italy that would actually, make a difference? And of course, it's the core export of Italy is organized crime. So that was our choice. That's why I left the newspaper and started this other activity.
Hello, I'm Aurora. My question was kind of related to hers, like still related to your career. So why did you choose to work specifically in the investigation sector and in the sector of organized crime? And if you worked also at, in international in organized crime also at an international level or just at national level, like with mafia and.
Well,
Thank you.
I like stories about the mafia. I read a lot of court documents about the mafia, even stuff from like 30 years ago. I love it. I love those stories. So that's one of the reasons why I chose to work in that sector. Nowadays, there is no local mafia because everything that organized crime might do, even locally, to make money, that money, well, back in the day, they could, go to Switzerland with a backpack with money in it and just deposit it in the bank. Nowadays, they can't do that anymore. So money has to move out when it's illegal, and then in order to, buy a car, buy a house, buy a hotel, they need to bring this money back in. So there is a lot of companies and corporations involved, and it's always international. I mean, the drug trade, the 'Ndrangheta, which is the number one mafia organization worldwide for the traffic of cocaine, they have ties with the cartels in South America. They bring the drug in, and of course, they have to bring the money there. And then once they sell the drugs on the street, you'll have a lot of, cash, What are you going to do with it? So you put it outside somewhere, you know, in China, in a lot of different countries where controls are not so tight, you know, and you're allowed in Dubai, you're allowed to keep the money there and nobody will ask questions. So what you do is you accumulate money there, and then little by little you take what you need. And so you're going to have to set up a company here and maybe make an invoice and, you know, get part of that money in and say, oh, it's because I sold such and such service. And then when you get that money, so it's always an international network nowadays. I hope that answered your question.
Hello.
Hi.
Taking account so many politicians charged for corruption, what is your observation and experience for people's attitude toward these sentences? Like, do they like the truth when it's relived, or do they like to be blind? And what's the distinction between elites and the ordinary people?
Well, you know, politics, it's something that you can't not take into account when you have a big organization that moves a lot of money, whether it be legal or illegal, because politics are somehow the regulators. They make the laws. So, of course, if you want to grow and you want your criminal organization to be powerful, you have to, draw in politicians, local politicians, national politicians. And of course, it's also very hard for a politician to distinguish between maybe a company that is building a bridge or a highway. How do you know whether the people behind that company are criminals or regular people? So sometimes, you know, politicians don't really do it on purpose, okay? But a lot of times they do, because power corrupts. So if you're there and you're handling a lot of power, you'll want more. You want more money, you'll want more power. And of course, you know, if you're following a politician and you say, well, I really like this guy, what this guy says, I agree with this guy or woman, it's kind of hard to accept that somebody might come out and say, oh, you know, he took a bribe or he's in with the mob. So that people don't like to hear that kind of thing. But you know, in Italy, we always say we are garantisti, okay? So people will say, when my politician gets, investigated, I will go out and say, oh, you have to wait until the third degree of judgment, assise, appello, Cassazione. That might take like 10 years. So if somebody took a bribe and the police says that they took a bribe, do I have to wait 10 years to actually, decide not to vote for this guy? Of course not. So that's why we need journalists to inform and people to read the news or to watch the news, which is something that's getting more and more difficult because media organizations aren't owned by media persons anymore. That's not their core business. So of course, they're also in with politicians and with corporations. So they have, they might decide to say this news and not this other news because it's more convenient for whoever is financing them. So it's very complex, but politicians are, of course, always within the network. Otherwise, criminal organizations would get nowhere.
Based on what you said, now in this time, we have the democratization of like the media. We have social media everywhere. So it would put you in front of multiple options. For example, you might be able to publish whatever you want without going back to the network for approval, for people interacting interventing with what you want to say. But this would also make you face the realm of false news that everyone is getting every day. And for now, people, they are more engaged with the social media and with everything they're getting on social media. Most of the new generation, they won't even watch TV. So what do you feel about that? Would you sometimes consider do a story that you want to do on your own social media because you already have a big name, so you will have good reach for it?
Well, the impact of social media right now is huge, especially in younger generations, but not only them. Even politicians are always posting on X and stuff. But it's a double-edged sword, because on the one side, it gives people the freedom to talk about things that media corporations won't talk about. On the other side, you have a lot of people just saying things that are not true. So how do you distinguish? I don't know. It's very tough. It's very tough because a lot of people may seem convincing, but then they're not telling the truth, or maybe they're misinformed. So what I always do is I try to find a plurality of sources. So not just listen to one source, but try to find somebody else who confirms that version, or someone even among the big media. I mean, we do have media corporations that are still, that tell the truth, depending on what they're talking about, of course. But yeah, that's the way to avoid fake news is to check, double check, triple check. That's the only thing I can think of.
You mentioned the Sigfrido Ranucci situation. I wanted to ask about the freedom of speech, the freedom of press in Italy, and what are your thoughts about that, if it's been threatened or not?
Well, the freedom of the press in Italy has never been particularly, liked by the powerful. Okay, we've always had this problem. And I think pretty much every country in the world has the same problem. Right now, I think that political circles and industrial and economic circles, the powerful, have a way of silencing people by, like I said, with lawsuits or with fake news, or even through social networks. I don't think that the freedom of the press is threatened in Italy, as long as people will decide to tell the truth and maybe to work as journalists, and people with ideals and who have care about morals, about ethics. It will never be threatened. Or people like to think that they can threaten or they can change it, but the people are always more powerful than the single individual, even though they might have a lot of money and a lot of political power. So I think it's important to mostly with you guys, you ladies and gentlemen that are very young, to try to teach you the right values, and then there will be nothing that these people can do to silence, the truth.
Good morning. I'm Cecilia. Thank you for being with us today. I have two questions. First, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the fact that many people and even politicians believe that Radiant journalist Roberto Saviano is lying, doesn't deserve to live under protection, since he also covers these topics? And the other question was, if you could tell us about one of the cases that you dealt with which according to you was one of the best or the ones that really stuck with you? Thank you.
Okay, Roberto Saviano. Well, I think anybody criticizing Roberto Saviano is, you know, is lying pretty much, because the guy, you know, went out there and told a story that nobody wanted to talk about. He was threatened. These people were arrested, so you know, it's not like he made up a story. So I think he should be supported, and if he feels threatened, then he deserves to, you know, be escorted, have an armored car, whatever. I mean, we spend a lot of money. Our government spends hundreds of millions, billions in other stuff that nobody really cares about. So why shouldn't they spend a little bit of money to protect the people that are speaking out against organized crime, against violence, against oppression? I mean, that's my take on Roberto Saviano. What was your other question? I'm sorry. Oh, the case. Oh, I remember. Well, a few years ago, I went and looked into this case of this guy from Calabria. He was basically, he ended up being recorded by the police, and he's talking about moving billions around the world, from China, from, you know, I think it was Tajikistan, everywhere. I mean, this guy is traveling around the world. And what happened is he was recorded, and the information went by accident into another case. It was deposited into another case, another 'ndrangheta case, by the prosecution of, I think, Palmi, and ended up in Reggio Calabria, and it was made public. So everybody began reading this stuff. Well, everybody within our circle. And we're like, how is this possible? How can these huge amounts of money, you know, be moving around without, you know, anybody talking about this? And so I proposed a story to Al Jazeera, and they said, yeah, go ahead. And they gave me 3 episodes on this People in Power show. I made this documentary. It's called The Launderer, and it's on the web. If you go on Al Jazeera, you can find it. And basically, I found out that moving the money, moving illegal money around the world is something so complex that it will give you a headache. I mean, these people go out. One thing that I found very interesting was that they get in touch with like this company in the Maldives that has to build a hotel. And they say, we will finance your hotel. We'll send you 100 million euro. Okay, and then we'll go in, and they make a contract and everything. And then I spoke to this guy in the Maldives, and he said, yeah, we signed a contract with these guys from Italy, but then they never showed up. They kept sending me SWIFT printouts of money transfers, but the money never arrived. So I tried to figure out what was going on, and they said, you know, the bank is not good enough. They can't move that much money. So we're going to try in a different way. So they kept this guy hanging for like 2 years. Okay. So what I figured out afterwards was that the contract itself had a value, because it can justify the movement of other money. So basically, this guy in the Maldives would never see his money. And after 2 years, he decided to go and find another financier. But in the meantime, these guys were using the contract to move other money that they needed, you know, to move from the place where they stashed it to another, you know, place where they could invest it. So that was one of the more interesting, although, you know, it might sound very boring, you know, you're talking about money moving around and companies and contracts. But it's very interesting because somehow you find out that the mafioso is not a guy, you know, with the hat and the gun who goes and shoots, you know, somebody because they stole their, whatever, their cow or their land, or that kind of thing. They're actually very, very intelligent people. They know how things work. They know how things work. They can go out of Italy and interact with people outside, and they will be on a higher level. So that's why they're very dangerous right now. And one thing that I noticed in the past few years is that nobody talks about mafia in Italy anymore. They're arresting hundreds of people right now, especially of the 'ndrangheta, because nowadays the prosecutor of Reggio Calabria, Lombardo, he is being moved to Trieste. He had all of these investigations in his drawer, so he's taking them all out, and there's hundreds of people being arrested, and nobody is talking about this except for the very local, like local news in Calabria and everything. But there is no national interest on what's going on. And what happens every time nobody is checking what these people are doing, it means they're building up and they're getting stronger. And then people like maybe things like the bomb under Ranucci's house happens, because when they feel strong enough and then you go and disturb them, they will react violently. So I think it would be very useful for people to start talking about organized crime again and figure out what their business is right now.
Hi, thank you so much for your intervention. My question is about organized crime and mafia. There is a lot of narratives created by movie, TV show, novels around it. Do you believe that this is making invisible real issues, or in the contrary, putting interests around organized crime issues?
Well, both. I read a lot of court papers, and I read a lot of transcriptions of recordings of mafiosi, when they talk among them. And they get a lot of their lore from films like The Godfather. They actually watch that, and they like it, because it's this is how, you're supposed to be. Because they're people like us. So they have pretty much the same kind of attraction for something that they might see on TV. Roberto Saviano was criticized because of the TV series Gomorrah, because people said that it was like a celebration of organized crime, and it would, push a lot of young people to identify with some of these characters and to try to act like them. And so it would, make a lot of new mafiosi. I think in part it's true, but on the other side, it's something that you need to tell, you need to show. It's not nice to know that there are people who actually behave like that, but they do exist. So why should we keep it hidden? Of course, the glorification of that kind of lifestyle is wrong, and sometimes these shows go way beyond what the message should be. But then again, that's part of the freedom of speech, and freedom to tell the story the way you want to tell it. Does that answer your question?
Hello, good morning. So we have already pointed out that mafia is not anymore the same thing that used to be in the 80s and 90s. Do you think that it's going to have another evolution, or it's going to be stuck as it is nowadays, more or less?
I think that mafia is already having its evolution. Like I said before, it's leveling up. Because if you look at the history of mafia, how does mafia begin? I mean, Italy was like a feudal state. You had a bunch of aristocrats, especially in the south, coming from France and from Spain, who owned the land, but they weren't there. Maybe, they were in France. So there was this local guy, Gabellotto, we called him. I don't know what it's called in English, but who basically administered the land for the aristocrat. And of course, he would choose who gets to work on the land, who gets paid, and he had a lot of power in his hands. And that's where the mafia came from. I mean, when these aristocrats left and their land was taken, the first in line were the mafiosi. So in a way, like I said before, you know, the mafia is the watchdog of power. Because if I'm a very powerful businessman and I have a big corporation and somebody is creating a big problem for me, I can't go out there and beat him up or kill him or, you know, do some. So what do? I get a criminal to do it. So the bigger power becomes and the more power is centered into the hands of very few people, the more mafia and organized crime is going to be useful for these people to go where they can't go. So I think that's the evolution of mafia right now. And it's also in creating, not only on the violence level, but it's in creating the channels through which these people can also move money. People that have legal businesses, you know, how, if I need to do something that I can't do, how do I do it? I find a network that's illegal or that's, you know, close to legal, and it's administered by people who are criminals. You know, so I think that leveling up has already happened. Only we don't realize it yet, but we may realize it soon.
Okay, I have two questions. So do you think that the trattativa Stato-mafia process still impacts today's politics and organized crime? And since you mentioned the important change in today's mafia functioning, in your opinion, do journalists today investigate in the same way as journalists such as Saverio Lodato, for example, did in the past years?
Well, okay, trattativa Stato-mafia is, it's a very complex kind of thing. Of course, there is always a trattativa with, which means, you know, that the mafia always, like I said before, always has to interact with politics. In that particular case, we're talking about, for whoever doesn't know the story, we're talking about the mafia choosing a new point of reference in Italian politics after the fall of the Christian Democratic Party, Berlusconi, Forza Italia. And this is what a lot of mafiosi have said, is that, you know, the mafia got together and said, okay, this is the winning horse. You know, we're going to bet on this guy and we're going to make ties with this guy. And somehow, you know, this is supported by the court proceedings against Marcello Dell'Utri and, you know, the case of Mangano, who was working for Berlusconi in Israel, although I think yesterday there was constitutional court, or the Cassazione said they will not take Dell'Utri's money that was given to him by Berlusconi because there is no clear tie that, you know, saying that that money is from is illegal money or comes from this agreement with the mafia. So I think that it's normal that every criminal organization has to have its point of reference in politics. The mafia has always had a very close tie with politics, especially right-wing politics in Italy. What you could call the neo-fascists in the old times. You know, we know that people like now I'm going to, you know, name some names that you might not know of, but like Delle Chiaie or Freda or people like that, Concutelli, they had, these are very like, you know, diehard fascists with who, you know, placed bombs, killed people. They were going and coming from Calabria and from Sicily. They had ties with the mafia, and sometimes they worked together with the mafia. Right now we have a right-wing government, and some of the people in this government actually come from that, you know, that same how should I say, not directly, but indirectly are connected with that same current. Okay. But of course, you know, it has to be something that's proven. So we can't say that, you know, people are in bed with the mafia just because they belong to that particular political part. That's, so what was the second question? I'm sorry. I got carried away and I forgot.
No, it was about like how today journalists work with the mafia, and I mentioned Saverio Lodato, like to put an example,
okay.
like the comparison between their work in the past and their work right now.
Okay. No, there are some journalists that still, I mean, the only way to work, I mean, there's a right way to work as a journalist and a wrong way. So the right way is to go and talk to people directly and not, you know, copy and paste stuff. That's what a lot of journalists in the past, you mentioned Saverio Lodato, but for example, there is this guy, I don't know if you guys know him. His name is Joe Marrazzo. He was the father of the former president of Lazio region, Marrazzo. He also had a program on TV, but his father used to work for Rai, and he was the first journalist, and you can find some of his documentaries on Rai Play, the very old stuff from the 70s. He was actually one of the first people to go up to mafiosi with a microphone and say, "You're a mafioso, you know, tell me what are you guys up to?" And it's very, very interesting the way he used to, you know, do his job is exactly the same way that people like me or whoever wants to approach this profession should do their job. It hasn't changed. There is no way that an AI can go out there and ring the doorbell and convince somebody to say something. It's something that cannot be done otherwise. It has to be done that way. So I think there's still you know, several colleagues around in Italy and many in the world that still work as they used to in the back in the days.
Hello, I'm Eduardo, and
Hi.
thank you for being here. I have a specific question on the Pizza Connection trial. So the Pizza Connection trial exposed deep links between the Italian and American Cosa Nostra, also during the Maxi Processo. Do you still use the aspects of mafia discovered in the 1980s to understand the today's mafia connections? And the second question is, Italian journalists are still interested in the developments of the five families today, because I think they still have a big control in the United States.
Well, historically, the mafia, Italian mafia in the United States, was something that was separate from Italian mafia in Italy. I mean, of course, they knew each other and they helped each other out, and you know, and there were connections. And of course, the United States being the biggest market for drugs, it was very useful for somebody to get those drugs and refine those drugs in Italy and then ship them out. And that's pretty much what Pizza Connection was. And that's how the mafia here and the mafia there made most of their money, by dealing drugs. I don't know how much I think there has been a rearrangement of the five families, and also a bigger involvement by the 'ndrangheta nowadays, especially in Canada, but also in the United States. And there is this alliance of sorts nowadays between all the mafias. I mean, there's this trial that's ongoing now. It's called the Operation Hydra. And what they found is that the Camorra from Rome, so the Senese family, with Sicilian Cosa Nostra and 'ndrangheta from Lombardia in Milano, they all got together with some, you know, entrepreneurs and businessmen, and they set up like that's why they called it Hydra. You know, it's a monster with many heads, and they're all working together now. So they're not fighting each other for shares of the market. So there is this alliance nowadays, whereas it doesn't matter where you come from. If you're, a criminal and you can bring something into the alliance, then, you'll be welcome. So I think the same thing is going on outside of Italy. But to say the truth, I'm not an expert of American mafia. So I can't really say for sure.
It's me again. I will move a little bit the focus from the mafia topic to the journalism topic. I would like to know, like, every story has its own target, and you write the story in order that a particular target is going to read it. Otherwise, no one is going to read it because it's made for no one in particular. So I wanted to know what is the target of your articles, who you're thinking about when you write your article, civic society, politicians, institutions.
Well, it depends. Well, maybe I didn't explain this very well. I usually do television. So what I do is investigative documentaries. That's like the main thing I do. I also write articles. I have this website, which is like a search engine for court documents about the mafia. And but okay, so the way you write something, you write a piece or you shoot a doc, depends on where it's going to be published or broadcast. If I'm writing for an Italian audience, of course, I'm going to center on very Italian issues, and maybe if I'm talking about organized crime, I will, talk about something that people in Italy are concerned about, whether it be business or, somebody got killed or some politician, is bringing votes to a criminal organization. Whereas if I'm proposing a documentary, per se, for Al Jazeera, I can't just talk about Italy because that has a wider audience. And a lot of people watching Al Jazeera don't even know anything about Italy and they don't care. So what I have to do is find a story that maybe starts in Italy and then moves elsewhere. I produced a doc called Killing the Ball once, many years ago, about football match fixing. And the documentary started from this football match here in Italy. It was of the lower series, Cremonese Paganese. So one of the two teams, basically, I think it was the goalkeeper of, I forget which of the teams. It's been a long time. He put Valium inside the water bottles of his teammates so that they would, be debilitated and in order to lose the match because he had bet money with these Chinese and Singaporean match fixers. So that's somehow for Al Jazeera, that's the perfect story because you start you're watching a game in Italy, a very local game, and then the story takes you out and you go all the way to Singapore. And then you find out that these people also fix matches in the South African World Cup. And, so it has like a, global interest, but it starts from a local story. So as a journalist that's based in Italy, when I propose something to an international broadcaster, they will always ask me, why should I let you do this story? Because I'm in Italy. I'm Italian. I know about this game, Cremonese Paganese. I can go and talk to the players that were in that game. I know what's going on here, but I can also bring the story outside and give it a global interest. So so basically the answer to your question is it depends what you're doing and who you're doing it for.
Hello, good morning. So my question is, you mentioned the threats, possible threats of being a journalist. You mentioned the legislative procedures or all the dynamics that you could face. So my question is on the other side of the coin. I would like to ask you the positive aspects, the gains that you have, that you face, the whatever kind of best aspects of being a journalist and independent. So it could be on a personal level, social, economic, everything that comes.
Well, the number one best aspect of doing this job of being an independent journalist is you get to sleep late. Okay, and that's the first thing. You don't have a boss. Okay, so you don't have to answer to somebody who says, you have to write this. You're the one proposing. And then, of course, there will be somebody at the broadcaster saying, having some kind of exchange with you. But in my experience, nobody's ever told me what to write or what my opinion should be. And sometimes people say that journalists shouldn't have an opinion, and that's to be objective. But being objective doesn't mean you don't have an opinion about things. Everybody has an opinion, and being truthful is saying what your opinion is. So another good aspect of this job is that you can structure your own life the way you want it to be. I mean, I have 2 kids, and I get to spend a lot of time with them because when I'm working, on all the office stuff and I'm doing research, I can do it at home. I don't need to be in an office from 9 to 5. On the downside, you don't make any money or you make very little money. You're not going to get rich by being an investigative journalist. But it's very satisfying because when your story comes out and you actually get to stop something that's wrong, then that's worth it, even if you didn't make that much money, and you're just leading a regular life. But then again, you get to sleep late, so it's worth it.
Hi again. I was just wondering when you speak to sources, obviously you're covering very controversial topics. What are the arguments that, in your experience, are the most persuasive for people to talk to you? Is it an ethical thing? Is it a personal thing? What is the kind of click that makes them open up?
Well, it depends who you're talking to. People who have something to hide will talk to you if they think you're going to be useful to them. So you don't have to give away right away, what your angle in the story is. You always have to kind of make them think that, maybe they can convince you to say something that's going to be useful to them. Because once you're on to a person and you insist, you say, I want to talk to you, and maybe you wait for them under their door or you ring at the doorbell. Those people at one point, most of them, are going to somehow, communicate with you just to get you to leave them alone, basically. So at that point, they're going to start thinking, how can this be useful for me and not damage me? So you have to, make them think that it's possible that maybe you're stupid enough to not understand or, be convinced by them that they're on the right side or they're the victims or, and this is if you're talking to someone who has something to hide. It's a lot harder, I think, when you talk to a victim, because somebody that's scared doesn't want to talk, and you as a journalist also have a harder time exposing them, because you could expose them to something harmful and damaging for them. So I think that's a lot harder. I'd rather talk to a mafioso than to a victim of the mafia. I find it a lot easier. And believe it or not, everybody wants to talk. When they see a camera, they see a journalist, even the worst of the mafiosi will want to talk to you. I don't know why. And sometimes it really, blows me away, because I go and look maybe on Facebook for somebody's profile, and these guys are posting videos of themselves going to a bank in Kazakhstan. And you're like, why? You're being investigated for this. Why are you posting this? And it's like the telephone thing, you know, we all know that nowadays, 90% of investigations are based on telephone recordings. And that's why, you know, magistrates should keep recording. And they shouldn't let politics stop them from doing so, because that's the main, you know, the main thing they have in their investigation. And people still keep talking about illegal stuff on phones. It's incredible. You'll be reading transcriptions, and these guys are talking like, your friend was just arrested because he said something on the phone, and they keep doing it. So somehow there's something within the human being that makes them want to talk and tell people about what they're doing, what they've done, even if it's something illegal and wrong.
Thank you. Another question. In my home country, Georgia, there's a critical situation for the press, and one of the founder of regional broadcast and online media, Zia Mohobeli, is charged and was and received Sakharov Prize in recent days. European Parliament.
He received what? I'm sorry?
Sakharov Prize from the European Parliament. So my question is, what measures would you like to be adopted beside the prizes and awards, which is actually post factum to someone who is really brave and dedicated? But what is your wishful measures to be adopted from the authorities or the institutions that you journalists would be more safer?
Well, the premise is that I'm not an expert of the situation in your country, and I don't really know what's going on within any detail. But I think prices are important because they get people to know the person and to know their work, what they say. In some countries, being a journalist is, like I said before, is more dangerous than others. I mean, being a journalist in Italy cannot be compared to being a journalist in Gaza, of course, and somehow the people who do it anyway are very, very brave, and they know that they can be killed, they can be imprisoned, and somehow they know that there won't be a happy ending to this, but they do it anyways. So what can authorities do? I think that the international community should be more concerned, and in a way it is, because right now there's a lot of international groups that support journalists internationally, like the OCCRP or the ICIJ. I mean, there's a lot of different organizations that give also tools to journalists so that they won't be subjected to spywares, and they help them out, and that they can share information so that they won't be the only ones who know something. I think that should be implemented further, and also there should be some kind of international recognition of a wider sort of which should be echoed wider. I don't know how this could be done, but on a local level, it's very obvious that if somebody is in peril, he should be given protection. I don't know what else could be done, but in some places it's just very dangerous to do it, this kind of job, and hats off to the people who do it.
So I think that was the last question. So thank you for your speech.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.